Hello everyone, Michael here. Last week I put out a reaction video where I shared my thoughts on Colt Caparoon's experience mixing his first Dolby Atmos track in his new Dolby Atmos studio. I'm really glad you all enjoyed it. If you haven't checked it out yet, you'll find the link in the description below. Now in that video I briefly mentioned an alternative way to pan Dolby Atmos objects using a smartphone as a pointer. A few of you have reached out asking if I could demonstrate exactly what I meant and show how this workflow looks in Pro Tools, and that's precisely what we're going to do today. We'll be looking at how to pan Dolby Atmos objects using a smartphone as a pointer in Pro Tools. It's a pretty cool technique that can save you a lot of time and hassle. But before we dive in, I want to emphasize that this is just one way to approach Dolby Atmos mixing. As always in audio, if it sounds good, it is good. Use whatever workflow works best for you. All right, let's get started and I'll show you how this works. The plugin we'll be using for this workflow is Sound Particle Space Controller, specifically the studio version. Now this isn't a new plugin, it actually has been around for quite some time. In fact, I made 2 videos about it about 2 years ago, but I never discussed it in the context of Pro Tools or for panning Dolby Atmos objects, and that is exactly what we're going to do today. The plugin has 2 main components. First, there's the actual plugin that you use in your digital audio workstation, and then there is a companion smartphone app available for both Android as well as iOS. The basic idea is pretty straightforward. You use your smartphone as a pointing device to position sound objects in 3-dimensional space. The smartphone then communicates that position to the plugin in your digital audio workstation, and the way Sound Particles has implemented that is actually quite convenient and usable. Surprisingly, there isn't much information out there on how this workflow actually works in practice, and that's why I felt a video demonstration was in order. So without further ado, let's jump into Pro Tools and start panning some objects around. So I'm going to start with an empty Pro Tools session, and this is really just a very basic empty Pro Tools session. The only thing that I did is I made sure that in the input-output settings we have set the Dolby Atmos renderer to internal renderer, because that is what we're going to use today. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to demonstrate Space Controller with one object. That's really all I need in order to demonstrate how that works. So we're going to have only one track. For that track, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a loop that many of you have already heard. I used it in previous videos. It comes from a video that I did about how to use Wwise in game audio. And let's just have a brief listen what we have here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that into an Atmos object, and then I'm going to use Space Controller in order to manipulate the 3-dimensional position of that particular object. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do for that is I'm going to turn that into an object. So I'm going to simply in the object settings select object 1112. That's the first one that I have. And I'm also going to disable the output to make sure that everything is just sent into the Dolby Atmos renderer. So let's play that again and let's see if we actually get something in the Dolby Atmos renderer. And yes, it comes in here as objects 11 and 12. And you know that how you would normally work is you would then open up the panner and essentially manipulate the individual kind of parameters that you have here in order to position that in 3-dimensional space. Now, obviously in Pro Tools, because you have so many options, that can be quite cumbersome. And if you automate all of them, that actually kind of is a little bit much. So we would like to have something that is a little bit simpler. And for that, we're going to use a different panner. We're going to use the Space Controller from Sound Particles. Now, you might already wonder how we're going to do that, because we obviously need to use the Atmos panner that comes with Pro Tools in order to pan everything into the Dolby Atmos renderer. And the answer to that is we need to have a little bit of a workaround. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to create a duplicate track, and the duplicate track we're going to route into a regular multi-channel layout. And then we're going to copy the automation that we are going to produce on that track into the object track that we have just created. And we will see that that is actually quite convenient, because Sound Particles prepared everything for us. We just need to kind of record a couple of automation lanes and then copy them over. And that's actually very straightforward. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a duplicate track of what I've just created. And this one I'm going to route into a multi-channel output. Now, regularly or normally what you would do is you would route that into your speaker kind of setup. So if you have a 9.1.6, for example, you you would route that into your actual 9.1.6 output. Now, I don't have that here. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm simply going to make that an bad track. I'm simply going to route that into 7.1.2. But once again, you would route that into however many speakers you have in your Dolby Atmos Studio. So let's just kind of do that like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute the object because we don't need that for a second. And let's just play and see if we're actually still getting audio. And yes, we're still getting audio. And if we look at the Dolby Atmos renderer now, we see that it's coming in as the bed. So once again, I'm just using the bed here for demonstration purposes. Usually you would send that to something that kind of corresponds to your speaker layout in your Dolby Atmos Studio. Now, on this duplicate track, we're now going to put the Dolby Atmos, we're now going to put the space controller from Sound Particles. So let's just add that here. So this is a multi-channel plugin. It comes under Sound Fields, and here we have the space controller. Now, I'm actually going to work with the trial. This is only the second time actually I did a video with the trial version of a plugin, and the reason for that is because for my particular workflows, the space controller never was that particularly useful. But once again, I'm not a Atmos mixing engineer, so you're kind of depending on how you work with Dolby Atmos, that might actually be a lot more useful than it was for me. But kind of if you just want to test it out, just download the trial version. It actually works quite well. Now we are going to use the version of Space Controller that corresponds to the track that I'm producing. I have it on a 7.1.2 bed track, so I'm going to select its stereo 7.1.2. If you like Cold Gabaroon, for example, have a 9.1.4 studio, you would select 9.1.4. But once again, for demonstration purposes, I'm using 7.1.2 here. And that will load the Space Controller plugin. Now here we have the Space Controller plugin. Now the first thing that we need to do is, and that is I'm honestly not quite sure why it does that, because we have actually selected it to be 7.1.2, but for some reason it kind of identified the output to be 9.1. So just make sure that the output is actually set correctly to, and I need to kind of scroll down here, 7.1.2. And that will make sure that everything is kind of panned correctly. Now, the panner itself is fairly self-explanatory. You have sort of the handle here that allows you to move that object around. You can move X, Y, Z positions, or if you want to work with a spherical layout, you can also do kind of azimuth and elevation. We're going to use the kind of the regular Cartesian coordinates, the cube layout for that purpose. And there are a couple of different ways on how you can pan that. You can either pan that as a mono object. In this case, everything is folded into mono, and then you pan it around. Or you can pan the individual channels. So you can pan the left channel and the right channel individually. You can use a handle in order to pan everything. So in this particular case, you have a handle, and kind of everything follows that particular handle. That might be useful in certain situations, or you can also mirror left and right. So if I'm moving left, I'm also moving the right one correspondingly. Now I'm going to kind of use the channel-based layout, because that's actually going to allow me to demonstrate something that might be important, especially if you're working with higher channel layouts. Now, before I get to that, there's also an advanced option. So if you enable these advanced options, you have a couple of additional options. You can choose to change the size of the object. You can change the gain of the object, and the gain to some extent kind of represents the distance of the object to the listener. You might have noticed that these objects, as I move them around, are always on the outskirts of that box. But in order to kind of to kind of change the distance, all you really need to do is change the gain, and that has the same effect. Now you can change the type of layout that you're using. Now in this particular case, I'm using a full sphere. I'm actually going to switch that over to half sphere, because we're working in Dolby Atmos, and the lower half of that sphere is not used in Dolby Atmos. You have this little icon here. If I click on that, then the speaker is going to kind of snap into the speaker positions. Now you might notice that as I'm moving this handle around, I'm not able to kind of reach the top positions here. And the reason for that is because the Z coordinate stays 0. Now in order to make sure that you can do the two, there's this little auto button here. Now if I enable that auto button, what happens is that the Z coordinate is automatically adjusted to the position of my handle. And that means that I now can also snap the speaker, or can snap the channel into the head speakers if I want to. So here, for example, I have 7.1.2, so this is the left head speaker. And, kind of this allows me to do that. Now, I'm going to turn it off, and I'm also going to turn off the snapping here because I don't really need that. The thing that is a lot more interesting to us for this particular video is here kind of the connection. And what this part here does is it allows me to connect this Space Controller plugin to the Space Controller application on my smartphone. And for that purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm first going to open up the Space Controller application. So let's open that up here. And as soon as I've opened that up, you notice that it has already connected. And the reason for that is because I did a test beforehand and I already did the connection. If you don't have the connection, there are really two ways on how you can connect it. So if I go into the settings menu here in the Space Controller app, what I have here, I have the connection status, and I can turn it over to Bluetooth. And in this case, it would connect through Bluetooth. Let me just close it here. And it should then essentially find the connection through Bluetooth. Now, I found that Bluetooth is not as reliable as Wi-Fi. So if you have the chance, just kind of connect through Wi-Fi. So I'm going to do that again, select Wi-Fi here. And if you connect through Wi-Fi for the first time, what you can do is you can click on this Wi-Fi setup button. And this is actually really convenient. What it will do is it will open up a QR code. And all you really need to do is click on scan QR code here. And oops, let me just I hope I can see that. And now essentially has found the connection and connects automatically. So this is really, really convenient. Now, the way this works is actually very straightforward. And by the way, you don't need to have a connection, a wired connection. The reason I have a wired connection here is simply because I need to record the screen of my iPhone. But otherwise, you don't have a cable kind of dangling from the smartphone. So the idea is that if I now kind of click on the touch to pan button on the big one here, it gets blue, and I can then move things around. So I can say I want my object back here, and then leave it there. And that's actually fairly convenient. Now, if you have multiple objects, I have individual links. Currently, I'm on link 1, so I can change here the link settings on the top row here. And what I can do, for example, is because I have two channels here, left channel, right channel, I can say that the left channel is controlled by link number 1, and the right channel is controlled by link number 2. That essentially means if I now kind of switch over on my app to link number 2, and I tap to pan, I have the right channel, and if I switch to 1, I have the left channel. And this allows me to kind of pan things around quite conveniently. So so let's just kind of record a little bit of automation, a little bit of panning automation, and then let's see how we get that panning information into the actual object, because currently we are just playing around with a duplicate track that is routed directly into my speakers, and that's not necessarily what I want. I actually want to record the panning that we're going to put into the actual Atmos object. So for that purpose, let's first, let me just close it here. And what I need to do is I first need to prepare the automation. And for the automation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the automation dialog here. And there are really two things that I need to do. And that is a little bit confusing if you do that for the first time. The first thing is that we need to actually record the automation of the parameters that are actually controlling Space Controller, so that we can essentially reread that and kind of continue to work from that. And these are, because we are working with the left, or we are working really with the first channel, these are X coordinate channel 1, Y coordinate channel 1, and Z coordinate channel 1. So these are kind of the left channel. Now, channel 2 would be the right channel. And if you have higher channel layouts, then you would have additional kind of channels. But in our case, we only have 2. And we are going to just kind of use the first one for demonstration. That's really all we need, and we're going to add that. Now, unfortunately, the way a Space Controller needs that automation, or the way it kind of reads those parameters, is not the way the panner in Dolby Atmos, or the Dolby Atmos, the ultimate panner in Pro Tools needs the parameters. So what Space Controller does is it's internally converting those parameters into parameters that we can use with the Ultimate Panner in Pro Tools, and those are kind of sent out with additional parameters from within the Space Controller, and these we will find if we scroll down here. And we can go down all the way down here. And essentially it's those three here: front position, rear position, front rear position, and height. And those are essentially the three parameters that we will need to kind of copy into our Ultimate Painter, because if you remember, those are the knobs that you have in the Ultimate Painter: the front position, the rear position, then kind of the distance between front and rear, and the height. So that's essentially how the Ultimate Painter works. So we're also going to add those three. That means we have 6 for each channel. Once again, if we would do the same thing for the second channel, we would have an additional 6, but we are just going to use those 6. And then let's add those automation lanes. And I'm going to simply kind of add them here. So that's the first one, the second one, the Y coordinate, the Z coordinate, the front rear position, the kind of the distance between front and rear, and the height. So those are the ones that we're going to use. Now, if you are also using things like size or other things and you're reading those out from the space controller, you would add that here. But because those are all parameters that we cannot control with our smartphone, the smartphone only allows us to control the position of the object. I'm not going to bother here. Those would be things that you would have to do in the Ultimate Painter from Pro Tools. So now let's record an automation here. So let's turn it over to right, and let's just kind of do a kind of swipe around, and then kind of copy that over to our Ultimate Painter. So let's just play that here. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to move that around. I need to kind of be a little bit careful with the cable that I'm having here. And then maybe up and to the back. And that's really everything I needed. So let's just double check in the space controller up if that's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. So let's play that again. So it's going to move around. It's the left channel. I moved it up here in the middle somewhere. That was not intended, but it's fine. And then essentially kind of it moves it back. Right. So it's doing exactly what I wanted to do in Space Controller. And if you would have kind of sent it to your speaker layout, you would hear it in exactly the same way you would hear it in Dolby Atmos. Now, what I'm going to do now is I have to copy those over to our Ultimate Painter. And for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially add the automation lines here. And I'm simply going to add, for the left, we are only going to deal with the front left position. Then I'm going to add the front right position, rear left position, sorry. Then we're going to add the kind of the distance between front and rear. And then we're going to add the height. So we have 4 here. And here we have the height left. So front position, rear position, front, rear, height. And now I just need to copy those automation lanes. So let's do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to copy this one here. So let's kind of take that and let's say copy. And I need to put that into the first 2. So I'm going to kind of put that in here. So I'm going to paste special to current automation type, and that will copy it over. And I need to copy the same lane here to the rear position as well. Now that's just because of the way the Ultimate Painter works. So essentially the Ultimate Painter has a very unique way of actually kind of defining the 3-dimensional position of a sound object. And that's just, don't worry too much about it. It's essentially just the way we need to do that. And then we need to kind of the distance between front and rear, and we have that here. So this is the 5th automation line here. So we're going to copy that here, copy, and we're going to paste that in here. So let's paste that, paste special to current automation type. And then finally the height information. And we're going to copy that one. And we're going to paste that in here. Paste special to current automation type. Let me just kind of minimize that, and let's mute that, and let's kind of unmute our object. And this should now have copied the automation into our object. So let's play our object. And let's open up the Dolby Atmos renderer to see if that's actually what's happening. So the object is moving around and then kind of back. So I moved it upwards here a little, but that's fine. And that means we have now used Space Controller in order to copy our automation to kind of use a smartphone to kind of position our object in three-dimensional space and then copy those automation lanes into the Ultimate Painter from Pro Tools, and we can work that way. Now, you would now sort of keep that additional track here, just in case you want to redo the automation and you want to redo the positioning. But other than that, this no longer serves a purpose. So would actually kind of mute it here and kind of work from there. Now, this is still not entirely convenient simply because we have this additional workaround that we need to copy the automation lane from one track to another track. It would be really nice if you could simply map the parameters of Space Controller into the parameters of the Ultimate Painter. But unfortunately, this is not possible in Pro Tools. My understanding that this is something that you can actually do with Reaper. So if you guys want me to look into that, I can certainly do that. But in Pro Tools, this is sort of the best way. You can kind of use Space Controller. And I think that's actually fairly convenient. Might not appeal to everybody. So if you are interested in this type of workflow, download the trial version. They have a very generous 30 days trial version, and you can kind of check out if it works for you. And if it works for you, great. Did not really kind of make a lot of sense for me, but kind of if you're doing that on a daily basis and you're kind of bothered by the amount of automation lanes that you have to deal with, this might actually be useful. Well, that wraps up everything I wanted to share with you today. I hope you found this demonstration helpful and that it gives you some new ideas for your Atmos mixing workflow. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check out this one here as well. YouTube seems to think you'll like it, and who am I to argue with the algorithm? As always, if you have any questions or if there are other Atmos-related topics you'd like me to cover, drop a comment below. I'm always interested in hearing your thoughts and suggestions. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and give this video a thumbs up if you found it useful. It really helps the channel. And with that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.